The dust of the Fletcher Ranch had settled deep into Tobias Crow's soul, a fine, gritty film that no amount of whiskey could wash away. For 3 years, his world had been defined by the ache in his back, the leathery toughness of his hands, and the thin blanket in the storage shed that smelled perpetually of hay, and a regret so profound he could taste it on the stale air. He was a ghost in his own life, a silent figure moving through the monotonous rhythm of dawn-to-dusk labor, his dreams worn down to a single desperate thought: escape. The $5 bill in his pocket was to have been the first step, the foundation for a new pair of boots that wouldn't let in the morning cold. But loneliness was a cunning predator, and its teeth sank deeper with every passing night, gnawing at the edges of his resolve until the foolish idea whispered to him by a stranger in town didn't seem so foolish anymore. A marriage lottery. $5. 1 ticket. 1 bride. It was a siren's call to a drowning man, a chance however slim, to grasp at a connection that would prove he was more than just a pair of working hands. The town square on the day of the draw was a cacophony of jeering hope and cynical anticipation. Tobias stood on its periphery, the crumpled ticket in his fist a damp, guilty secret. He told himself it was a folly, a final pathetic surrender, but a small, stubborn ember of hope refused to be extinguished in the cold emptiness of his chest. When the merchant on the platform, a stocky man with a cigar clamped between his teeth, called out the number, the world seemed to slow. Tobias's own fingers trembled as he smoothed the paper, the digits a perfect, terrifying match. His stomach dropped like a stone down a deep, dark well, a visceral plunge of pure dread. This was not what he had imagined. This was not what anyone had imagined. All eyes turned to him as he was pushed forward, a current of muffled laughter and shaking heads marking his passage through the crowd. He felt the heat of 100 stares branding his skin, a solitary fool caught in a trap of his own making. Then he saw her, and the air left his lungs in a silent rush. She stood on the platform, a head taller than any man present, a statue of quiet defiance carved from something older and far more resilient than the rough-hewn planks beneath her feet. Her beauty was not soft or inviting. It was a stark, formidable thing that made men forget how to breathe. Her dark eyes, like chips of polished obsidian, scanned the faces below with an expression that lived in the desolate space between contempt and a profound, bone-deep resignation. Her hands were bound before her with a coarse rope, not tied with cruelty, but with a chilling, ceremonial finality, as if she were a wild creature, a prize wolf, momentarily pacified. This was his bride. This was Atsa. The ember of hope in his chest sputtered and died, replaced by the cold, sharp certainty that he had not bought a future, but had merely shackled himself to a different, more terrifying kind of ruin. The merchant's congratulatory clap on his shoulder felt like a death sentence. The word wife, a grotesque joke in the man's mouth. Tobias could only look up, his own world rendered small and insignificant, into the face of a giant Apache woman who was now his to claim, and in her unyielding gaze, he saw the reflection of his own devastating mistake. The walk back to the Fletcher Ranch was a silent, suffocating procession through the dying light of the day. Every step Tobias took felt like a betrayal, leading this formidable woman not to a home, but to the stark evidence of his own failure. He stopped before the weathered storage shed, its warped door hanging slightly ajar like a crooked smile of mockery. Shame washed over him, a hot, prickling tide that crept up his neck and settled in his jaw. He could feel Atsa's presence behind him, a tall, silent monument to his own foolish gamble. She did not speak as he pushed the door open, revealing the cramped, single room that held the entirety of his life. A thin blanket on the packed earth floor, a wooden crate serving as a table, and the pervasive, sweet rot smell of old hay. This was the kingdom he had won for his $5. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She had to duck her head to clear the low doorway, and the space, which had always felt lonely, now felt criminally small. She stood in the center, her dark eyes taking in the meager possessions, the poverty etched into every splinter of wood. Her silence was more punishing than any words could have been. When she finally turned to face him, her expression was unreadable, but her voice, when it came, was flat, a simple statement of a brutal fact. She offered him a clean way out, a lie that would salvage the broken pieces of his life. Tell them she had run away. Tell them she was too strong, too wild. No one would question it. He could keep his job, his meager existence, and forget the entire wretched affair. The temptation was a physical ache, a whispered promise of a return to the familiar misery he knew how to endure. But before the words of agreement could form on his tongue, the world outside the shed erupted with a sound of booted feet and coarse laughter. Shadows fell across the doorway, blocking the fading sun. Harlan and 3 other ranch hands stood there, their grins sharp and predatory in the twilight. Their eyes, full of a venomous mixture of mockery and a darker, hungrier intent, crawled over Atsa, reducing her to an object, a novelty, a prize to be taunted. Tobias felt his throat tighten, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He knew these men, knew the casual cruelty that was their currency. Harlan took a step forward, his words dripping with feigned camaraderie that barely concealed a threat, his hand moving as if to touch Atsa, to claim a piece of the property he believed Tobias now owned. A cold, sharp clarity cut through the fog of Tobias's fear and shame. It settled in his chest, a hard, immutable weight. He saw the way Atsa stood, perfectly still, yet coiled like a spring, her hands curling into fists of restrained fury at her sides. He saw the ugliness in Harlan's grin, the entitlement in his stance. And in that moment, the choice was no longer about a lottery ticket or a $5 bet. It was about something far more fundamental. As Harlan reached out, Tobias moved, not with speed, but with a deliberate finality, placing his own body squarely between the ranch hand and the woman. His voice, when it came, was quieter than he expected, but it did not shake. He told them to leave. He told them she was not theirs to touch. The laughter that followed was brittle, laced with surprise and a newfound hostility. Harlan's eyes narrowed, the pretense of friendliness vanishing, replaced by a promise of future retribution. But they left, their mocking echoes fading into the encroaching darkness, leaving behind a silence that was now charged and different. Later that night, the heavy tread of the ranch owner himself, Fletcher, announced another kind of judgment. The man stood in the doorway, his gaze sweeping over the shed, over Tobias, and finally resting on Atsa with a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. His words were not a request, but an eviction. 48 hours. Get her off his property. The reasons were spat into the dirt, a mixture of prejudice and cold practicality. Tobias felt the ground of his already precarious world give way completely. He was now a man with no job, no roof, and only the formidable, untrusting woman beside him, who had witnessed the entirety of his ruin and had, just hours before, offered him a chance to avoid it. He had refused that chance, and now they were both cast out, bound together in a shared exile. The pre-dawn darkness was a thick, silent accomplice to his crime. Tobias moved through the sleeping main house like a ghost, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The worn floorboards, familiar as the lines on his own hands, now felt like a trap waiting to spring. The door to Fletcher's office was unlocked, an oversight born of arrogant security. The metal cash box on the desk was cold and heavy in his trembling hands. He counted out the wages owed, the exact sum, nothing more. The bills felt like stolen fire in his palm, the price of his old life and the currency for a new one. Turning to leave, he froze. Fletcher stood in the doorway, a solid silhouette of judgment. For a long, breathless moment, the world hung suspended on the edge of violence. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire frontier, the rancher stepped aside. It was not forgiveness, but a grim understanding. He was letting Tobias leave with what was his, but he was also cutting him loose, casting him out into the unknown with the woman who was now his burden and his responsibility. They met at the edge of the property as the first sliver of sun bled over the horizon. Atsa was waiting, her few belongings wrapped in a cloth. She said nothing, her eyes briefly flicking to the money he clutched, then to the determined, haunted look on his face. They started walking north, away from the only life Tobias had known, the rising sun painting their backs in hues of orange and gold, a cruel mockery of the hope he was supposed to feel. For 3 miles, the only sounds were the crunch of their boots on gravel and the distant cry of a hawk. Then, the hope shattered. Dust plumes appeared on the road ahead, resolving swiftly into 4 riders, moving with purposeful speed. Harlan led them, his expression a mask of smug triumph, the other men fanning out to block the path, a coiled rope on one saddle, a rifle held loosely across another. They were not there to talk. Their posture was that of hunters who had cornered their prey. Harlan's voice cut through the morning air, spinning a tale of theft and illegality, claiming the lottery had been a sham and Atza was stolen property to be returned. Tobias felt the ground become unsteady beneath his feet, the fragile future he had just bought crumbling into dust. He looked to Atza, and in the still fury on her face, he saw the truth of the merchant's corrupt dealings. When the ultimatum came, walk away or be treated as a thief, the choice was already made. His refusal was a quiet, solid thing, a final line drawn in the dirt. What happened next was a blur of violent motion. As one of the men began to dismount, Atza moved with a speed and ferocity that stole the air from Tobias's lungs. She was a force of nature, yanking reins, unseating riders, using a captured rifle as a club with brutal efficiency. The world erupted into chaos of shouting men, panic horses, and the sharp report of a gunshot that kicked up dirt where Atza had stood a second before. Tobias saw Harlan drawing his pistol and lunged without thought. He grabbed the man's leg, pulling with all his strength, and they tumbled into the dust in a tangle of limbs. A sharp, cracking pain exploded in Tobias's side as a boot connected with his ribs, white-hot and nauseating, but he held on, gritting his teeth against the agony, his only goal to keep Harlan from taking aim. He was a brawler, not a fighter, but in that moment, he was an anchor of pure, stubborn defiance. When the struggle ended, the remaining riders were fleeing, and Harlan was scrambling away with a bloody lip and a promise of vengeance in his eyes. Tobias stood slowly, clutching his injured side, each breath a sharp, stabbing reminder of the cost of their freedom. Atza was at his side immediately, her hands surprisingly gentle as they probed his ribs. Her gratitude was not in words, but in a brief, startling press of her forehead against his, a gesture of such profound and unexpected connection that it momentarily overshadowed the pain. She declared their planned route north now impossible and pointed east toward the rugged, unforgiving hills she knew from a different life. The climb was a fresh kind of torture. Every step sent jolts of fire through his chest, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. He sweat through his shirt despite the cool air, his vision swimming at the edges. Atza moved ahead with an innate certainty, her form a steady beacon he focused on, her occasional pauses to let him catch up a silent acknowledgement of his suffering. They reached the cave as the sun began to dip below the hills, its entrance a hidden seam in the rock face, a secret kept by the land itself. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the ancient scent of stone and dry earth. Faint light filtered down from cracks above, illuminating faded paintings on the walls, spirals, handprints, the shapes of animals, a silent history that spoke of a people and a time before all this. Atza moved to a seemingly random pile of stones and began to carefully dismantle it, revealing a hidden cache beneath. From it, she drew out old, tightly woven blankets, a leather pouch of dried herbs that smelled of the high desert, and a bone-handled knife. These were not mere supplies. They were a legacy, left by a grandmother who had taught her to prepare, to survive, to remember. As she crushed the herbs and pressed the poultice against his aching ribs, the cooling relief was immediate. Her hands were efficient and sure as she bound his chest with strips of cloth, her focus absolute. In the quiet intimacy of that ancient place, surrounded by the ghosts of her past, the rigid walls of suspicion that had stood between them since the platform began, for the first time, to show a hairline fracture. He was no longer just her captor or her foolish savior. He was a wounded man who had fought for her. And she was no longer just his unwanted prize. She was a woman with a history, a lineage, and the knowledge to heal. The cave was a sanctuary. It's cool, still air a bomb after the searing pain and terror of the road. In the faint, dusty light filtering from above, Tobias watched Atsa as she moved with a quiet reverence, her fingers tracing the faded red and black symbols on the stone wall. The silence between them was no longer just an absence of sound, but a space slowly filling with unspoken questions. He saw the way her shoulders, usually set in a line of defiant strength, seemed to carry a different weight here, a burden of memory and loss. The poultice she had made from her grandmother's hidden herbs had eased the fire in his ribs, and the simple act of her care had dismantled another layer of the wall between them. He found his voice quiet and hesitant, and asked the question that had haunted him since the square. He asked why she had truly been taken from her people. For a long moment, he thought she would not answer, that the shutters would close behind her eyes once more. But then she began to speak, her voice low and steady, each word a stone dropped into the deep well of the past. She told him of traders who had come for horses, but whose eyes had desired something else. She told him of an 8-year-old girl, her sister's daughter, and the predatory hunger in the men's gazes. The story unfolded not with dramatic flair, but with a grim, factual horror. She described the violence of her intervention, the cracking of bone, the near-lethal fury with which she had defended the child. Then came the true betrayal. The traders, influential and wealthy, had twisted the story, painting her as the savage aggressor. The elders of her tribe, faced with the threat of soldiers and retribution from the nearby settlement, had chosen the path of appeasement. They had sold her to the very men she had fought, branding it justice, a sacrifice for the greater peace of the tribe. The words landed in the quiet cave with the force of a physical blow. Tobias felt a cold, sickening fury settle in his stomach. Her strength, her courage in protecting a child, had been her curse, making her a problem to be disposed of, a commodity to be traded. It was in the wake of this devastating confession, as the echoes of her past hung heavy in the air, that a shadow fell across the cave's entrance. A figure stood there, backlit by the emerging moonlight, a silhouette of quiet authority. Atsa's entire body went rigid, her hand instinctively flying to the bone-handled knife at her belt. The woman who stepped into the dim light was older, with strands of silver woven through her long dark hair, and she carried herself with the same innate power as Atsa. The resemblance was unmistakable. This was Naish, her sister. The air grew thick with a tension far more dangerous than any they had faced with Harlan's men. Naish's eyes, sharp and assessing, took in the scene, the hidden cave, the wounded white man, the proximity between them. She spoke calmly, revealing that the elders, driven by the relentless pleas of Naish's daughter, the very child Atsa had saved, had spent the tribe's savings to buy her contract from the merchant. She held out a folded paper, a deed of ownership that stated Atsa belonged to no one. It was freedom, true legal freedom. But as with all things in their lives, it came with a condition, a price tag attached to her salvation. The condition was stated not with malice, but with a weary finality. Atsa could come home. She could have her family, her place, her name back. She could hold her niece again. But to do so, she would have to leave Tobias behind. The elders would not allow an outsider, a white man from the world that had caused them so much pain, into their camp. It was about survival, Naish explained, about protecting what little they had left from further conflict. The offer hung in the air, a golden key to a gilded cage. Tobias watched the war play out on Atsa's face, a brutal conflict between a lifetime of longing for home and the fragile, untested bond she had just begun to form. He saw the aching desire for her family, for the little girl who had not forgotten her, warring with the hardened knowledge of how easily she had been cast out. He knew, with a certainty that carved a hollow space inside his chest, what the right choice was, what the safe choice had to be. He forced the words out, telling her to take it, to go home, to have the life she deserved. But Atsa turned on him, her eyes blazing with a fury that was not directed at him, but at the very notion of the choice. Her voice rose, sharp and clear, echoing off the ancient walls. How could she be happy, knowing she had chosen comfort over the one person who had chosen her, who had fought for her, who had given up everything without being asked. She turned back to Naish, her decision made without a second of hesitation. She would not go back, not under those terms. The rejection was absolute, a definitive severing from the past. In that moment, standing in the dim cave, she was no longer a woman to be sold or saved by others. She had chosen her own path, and it was the path that led forward with him. The merchant's wrath, once a distant threat, now took physical form on the wind. The faint but unmistakable sound of horses, too many and moving with a coordinated purpose, reached them even before Naish had fully disappeared into the night. These were not like Harlan's drunken ranch hands. These were hunters, their approach confident and unhurried, a grim promise that they would not be easily shaken. There was no time for rest, for processing the seismic choice Atza had just made. The fragile peace of the cave was shattered. They moved back into the darkness, Atza leading Tobias through a narrow, twisting passage in the rock he never would have found, a secret exit known only to her grandmother's stories. They emerged onto a rocky hillside, the cold night air a slap in the face, the torches of their pursuers already flickering near the cave's main entrance below. The race had begun, and they were already starting from a place of exhaustion and injury. Their flight west was a relentless, grinding ordeal. They moved like phantoms through the landscape, Atza's knowledge of the land their only advantage. She chose paths over loose scree that left little trace, led them through dry riverbeds where the water would obscure their tracks, and navigated by the stars with an unerring instinct Tobias could only marvel at. Every step was a fresh agony for him. The cracked ribs, barely stabilized by her bandages, sent jolts of white-hot pain through his torso with every uneven breath, every stumble on the treacherous ground. He bit back groans, his face a pale, sweat-sheened mask of determination in the moonlight. They pushed on through that first night and into the dawn, their world shrinking to the next hiding place, the next mile of cover. Throughout the next day, they saw distant dust plumes on the horizon, the glint of spyglasses on distant ridges. The merchant's reach was long, his pride wounded, his investment now a personal vendetta. They were quarry, and the hounds were always just a ridge away. On the second day, the fever took him. The constant strain, the pain, the cold nights and searing days finally broke his body's defenses. It began with a deep, bone-rattling chill that no amount of sun could warm, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. Then the heat came, a blazing inferno under his skin that left him drenched and delirious. His steps became shuffling, uncoordinated staggers. The vast, open landscape around him swam in and out of focus, the horizon tilting dangerously. Atza, her own exhaustion a heavy weight in her limbs, did not hesitate. She took his arm, draping it over her shoulders, supporting the bulk of his weight as if he were a child. Her own powerful frame, which had once seemed so intimidating, was now his only crutch, the solid, unwavering pillar that kept him from collapsing into the dust. They moved slower, painfully so, the distance they covered shrinking with every hour the fever raged. That second night, they found meager shelter beneath a rocky overhang, in a dried-up riverbed. The wind howled through the canyon, a lonely, desolate sound. Tobias shivered violently, his body racked by chills despite the heat pouring from him. Atza gathered him close, pulling his trembling form against her own to share what little warmth they could generate. She held him as the fevered dreams gripped him, his muttered words nonsensical fragments of his old life. In the deep, consuming darkness, with the hunters somewhere out in the night, she began to whisper. The words were in her own language, soft and flowing, a low, rhythmic cadence that was neither a prayer nor a song, but something in between. They were words of strength, of the land, of endurance, passed down through generations of her people. She spoke them into his hair, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of his sickness. In that moment, he was no longer a burden slowing her down. He was the reason she was still fighting, still moving forward. Without him, her survival would have been just that, survival, a hollow and angry existence defined only by running. With him, it had become a journey toward something, a shared future she had never dared to envision. She kissed his burning forehead, a gesture of fierce, protective tenderness, and whispered a promise in the old tongue that they would reach the settlement, that they would start over. The third day dawned gray and cold, the fever having broken in the night, leaving him weak as a newborn colt but lucid. The world had sharp edges again. With her help, he stood, his body aching and hollowed out, but his mind clear. They kept moving, a slow, painful trudge toward the west, toward a hope that was now tempered by the brutal reality of their suffering. The pursuit was still out there, but they were still moving, a single, determined entity forged in the crucible of fear and sustained by a bond that had been tested in fire. The settlement appeared as a mirage at midday, a sparse cluster of weathered wooden buildings nestled in a shallow valley, their chimneys sending thin, brave threads of smoke into the vast, indifferent sky. To Tobias, whose world had shrunk to the next agonizing step and the ever-present fear of pursuit, it looked like a vision of heaven itself. They walked into the outskirts, two figures so coated in dust and weariness they seemed to have emerged from the very earth. People stopped their work to stare, their eyes curious but not unkind, accustomed to strangers who carried their pasts like heavy packs. The first building they approached had a faded sign that simply read rooms. A woman with a face as lined and weathered as old leather stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. Her gaze, sharp and assessing, swept over them, taking in Tobias's pallor and the way he favored his side, the quiet, formidable strength in Atsa's stance, the unspoken story of hardship that clung to them both. She didn't ask for a tale. She simply gave a short, practical nod toward a narrow staircase. $2 a week, meals included. No trouble, she stated, her voice raspy but firm. Atsa met her gaze and gave a single, definitive nod in return. No trouble. It was the only contract they needed. The room at the top of the stairs was small, its walls bare save for a single, fly-speck calendar. A simple iron-framed bed stood against one wall, a washstand with a chipped porcelain basin against the other. A single window, its glass wavy and imperfect, looked out over the main street. But to them, it was a palace. It had a solid door, and when Tobias slid the heavy iron bolt across, the sound of it clicking into place was the most profound and beautiful noise he had ever heard. It was a sound that meant safety. A silence descended, thick and heavy with the weight of their journey. But for the first time, it was not a silence of fear or suspicion. It was the silence of arrival. They washed away the grime of the trail and the basin, the water turning dark and cloudy, a ritual cleansing of the old life. The simple act of closing a locked door behind them felt like a miracle. Later, as the deep blue twilight settled over the settlement and a soft glow from a kerosene lamp filled the small space, Tobias took Atsa's hand. Her fingers, once curled into fists of defiance or bound by rope, were now relaxed in his. He looked around the room, at the simple bed that was wider and softer than any he had known, at the locked door, at the woman standing before him. He spoke softly, acknowledging the absurdity of their situation, the lack of ceremony, the humble surroundings that were a universe away from any traditional notion of a wedding. Atsa's response was not in words, but in the way she looked at him, her dark eyes holding his without a trace of the old walls or the guarded contempt. She reached up and touched his face, her calloused fingers gentle against his skin. The gesture was one of such profound and simple possession that it stole his breath. This, she conveyed without speaking, was perfect. It was earned. It was theirs. In that quiet, lamplit room, the story that had begun on a platform with a crumpled ticket found its true ending. It was not an ending of legal papers or societal approval, though those would come later with a circuit judge, a mere formality. The real marriage had been forged in the fire of their shared exile. It had been sealed when he first stood between her and a crowd of mockery, when she fought off armed men to protect him, when she held him through the fever and he, in turn, refused to let her face the wilderness alone. It was a bond built not on ownership, but on a series of choices, each one a brick laid in the foundation of a shared life. They had been two solitary souls, one defined by loneliness, the other by betrayal, told by the world they were of little worth. But in that small locked room, They had discovered a truth more valuable than any gold strike. They had found a home, not in a place, but in the quiet, steadfast certainty of each other. Outside, the world continued with all its hunters and schemers and struggles, but inside, there was only peace and the beginning of everything.